All right, I think we're going to get started. So, most of you know the man, Rodney. He is a Liberty on the Rocks regular. He is a crypto and cannabis enthusiast, and he's a professional bong racer. So, Rodney and his friends are going to talk about their panel tonight. I'm going to let them all introduce themselves, since I haven't had the pleasure of knowing them yet. So, give it up for Rodney and his Cannabis Funhouse.
All right. Thank you very much. Always very, very happy to be here, and I'd like to introduce to you some people, but I'm going to preface this by saying that there are, if you are a cannabis enthusiast, and not like Josh said, you do not have to engage in smoking weed to be a cannabis enthusiast. Many times I tell my friends to go ahead and get people high, and that I mean by letting them use the ointments, letting them try the teas, letting them get part of the edibles that cures and helps their particular ailment, and they will be high on the fact that they didn't have to pass out because of the pharmaceuticals. They did not have to pass bloody stools just because they had bowel systems that they couldn't take care of. If you are a cannabis enthusiast and you have a political representative come to you and say, vote for me, tell them to get high with you.
There you go.
Tell them to use a tincture. Tell them to, better yet, smoke a bowl.
Hey.
It is too long and too hard for these guys to go to the thing and spend our money and then discount us too easily. So before we get on that train, because there's going to be a lot of opportunity for us, first I would like to introduce Bridgette Danville. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty good. Okay, and we've been friends for a long time. I'm going to let Bridgette introduce herself, and then after that, I'll talk with Chris Jetter, and then we'll sit down, and if you guys have interesting topics, but we're going to take about 10 minutes each to do so, okay?
I am Bridgette Surratt, as Rodney said, and I'm here to talk about banana pudding.
Yay, banana pudding!
Not really.
Banana pudding?
I know, it's delicious, isn't it? Come on over here.
There you go.
There we go.
There you go.
I run a patient group down in Colorado Springs. We are Canna Patient Resource Connection, so I am the medical aspect of a cannabis enthusiast. I don't have the luxury of using it recreationally because I've lost the ability to get a buzz from it just because I take it every single day, inconsistently and in very high doses, probably more than most rec users would use in at least a week or a month here as my daily take. But today, what I would like to talk to you guys about is the importance of cultivation and how right now we are watching Colorado hand over the cannabis industry, the medical cannabis industry, to the pharmaceutical companies, and the state is acquiescing to federal control. And the only way for us to really keep this in the hands of the patients is to keep cultivation in the hands of the patients. And unfettered cultivation, a cancer patient should be able to grow whatever they need to grow.
Amen.
And that's why A20 was passed the way it did. Unfortunately, what's not in A20 is getting us in trouble. It's the how and the when and where. And so local areas are using home rule to try to zone us out of our medicine. Over the last 2 years, Colorado has actually gutted the caregiver and the patient rights section of A20 through various legislation. We no longer have the right to cultivate or process if we listen to the state law. And that's the qualifier here. So patients have lost the ability to cultivate. We have lost the ability to process the medicine that we need. And a lot of patients, I can tell you just down south, in the last 2 years since Colorado Springs first enacted those particular restrictions, we've lost about 40 patients because of access issues. And then the state went ahead and passed HB 1220 and HB 1221 a year ago, and Bob's your uncle, and now we don't have a good medical program. The other thing I wanted to mention to you, because I know not a lot of Coloradans are aware, the Department of Regulatory Agencies, DORA, They are actually looking at combining the medical and recreational regulatory systems. And there are some things that do make sense. You know, you shouldn't have to have different plants, you know, same plants, different tags, whatever the tracking system is. It should all be one. However, what they are toying with doing is changing the licensure type from medical to retail so that everything would be retail. Now, how would that affect your medical patient? Colorado Springs specifically does not allow recreational. It is in their statute that they specifically do not allow retail establishments. So the minute the state merges those two frameworks together, we no longer have a medical program in part of the state. And so it's very important that right now, the medical and the recreational or the retail remain separate. Because right now, we're really watching Colorado hand over the CBD industry, hand over the medical industry to companies like GW Pharmaceuticals. CBD, Epidiolex specifically just got FDA approval. No other CBD is FDA approved, just the Epidiolex. So technically speaking, the only legal CBD that you have or in compliance is either in a legal state or it's by prescription.
Wow.
THC is on its way there. Within about a year and a half, Sativex is a 1-to-1 ratio, and THC is about to be FDA approved for glioma treatment, brain cancer treatment. So just in case anybody was not aware of the fact that THC and CBD have shown excellent results in treatment-resistant gliomas, it's actually getting FDA approval as equivalent to a chemotherapy drug, so that you can use in lieu of chemotherapy. Unfortunately, that puts us, who are using cannabis as herbalism, in a very tight spot. So once THC is FDA approved, there is a very good chance that the medical aspect of it is going to go to pharmaceutical, and then the federal government's just going to let states do retail. And that's the situation we're looking at now. So please be very mindful this year as we go through this next legislative session. You know, last year we had a couple of bills vetoed. The governor decided autism shouldn't be a qualifying condition and vetoed that after it passed. I think only 15 legislators voted against it in the whole legislature, and the governor vetoed it at 5:01 when the parents had left at 5 o'clock. Didn't face the parents to tell him. So just be mindful that these things are happening and that we are fighting in the legislature, and we are at risk of losing the medical aspect to the cannabis program. And it very could happen. It could happen very easily. So.
You know, that's don't go anywhere, because we're gonna be sitting right here, and hopefully we'll have a lot of questions from everyone, but I'm next. So get out of the way. All right. The topic that I had chose to speak about is environment. Now, I started the Liberty of Weed group, and the Liberty of Weed is about the ubiquitous use of cannabis in its many forms for the betterment of community, environment, and liberty. And environment is a really tough position that the cannabis industry finds itself in. It is required to put its product in and overpackage it. And the overpackaging of the product is causing a lot of visual pollution, not only environmental challenges around rivers and lakes and with wildlife, but also, in some estimations, it's giving opportunity for other areas of concern to arise in the minds of the people that are not in favor of cannabis. And they are looking at the packaging as being a problem on their yards. They're looking at the packaging as being a problem in schools. They're looking at the packaging as being all kinds of problem. And one of the challenges that I have always posed and I continue to pose, is where is the harm in what you are packaging? Now, if you can sell a Budweiser in a screw-off top, then, and it is only X amount of packaging necessary to contain the liquid in there, and you can, before you walk off of the sidewalk, have that product consumed, why are you making us go through all of the different challenges for something that has yet to be proven harmful by ingestion? I am not saying a 60-pound bale of pot falls on your head from a distance that it doesn't snap your neck. It will, maybe. What I'm saying is that the substance itself in ingestion has not proven to kill anyone. And for these legislators that are not getting high with you, right? And for these opponents of legalization that are already in the legislature, and they are creating more and more roadblocks for you to get your medicine, for me to be able to enjoy the substance of my choice, for people to be able to put hands on to what people consider one of the greatest miracles ever given to man because of health, happiness, and the pursuit of property, then thank you. That's my libertarian. I read the book. But if these are the cases that you're wondering about, then when you look at the container on the ground, don't blame the user, right? I mean, when you pass by Triangle Alley on Spear or on downtown, and you see bottles in the gutter, and you see needles on the sidewalk, all of a sudden there is this greater concern in our council about being able to put those people in a place of safety. Well, I'm trying to say that we can put cannabis users in a place of safety and decrease the packaging and not have so many negative occurrences. So if you have a challenge, which I have a challenge with some of the packaging because it's just frivolous and it's causing a whole lot of problems, then let's get together and let's stop it. Superfluous. All right, so that's what I'm talking about. If you guys have some questions on that, we'd be happy to entertain those directly after I get to introduce this guy right here. Now this guy right here, happy birthday to you, Chris Jetter. Yay! Happy birthday! Chris Jetter is the curator of the Bongathon. Last year was my first year at the Bongathon. Not gonna miss another one, period. My year starts after the Bongathon. And what I'm thinking about my whole next year is how am I gonna get to the Bongathon? And so, and if you think that I'm rare, I am not. And I hope that you guys will, there's a dad bus that says RTD. I hope that you guys have the opportunity or take the opportunity to come and enjoy the Bongathon with us, but I'm not going to do that right now. I want Chris to go ahead and take his time and inform you on whatever he wants to talk about. But ladies and gentlemen, Chris Jetter.
Thank you very much. I invented the dab bus, by the way. Just look up the headline, Pot Collectives Test Limits of Law via the Denver Post 2013. Yes, we did test the limits of the law. I'm a Colorado native. I've lived here my entire life. I worked on Amendment 20, which was a medical amendment for marijuana. I worked on Amendment 64, which was the recreational amendment. I just want to take you back a little bit to the past. When we passed the original amendment for medical marijuana, it didn't actually go into law in 1999, like a lot of people believe it did. I mean, it did go into law in 1999, but it was actually voted in 1998. It didn't hit the ballot that year because the Secretary of State hid 25,000 signatures in her desk drawer. And the only reason we found him is because she passed away.
Yeah.
She passed away. They did find the additional 25,000 signatures, which did qualify to make it on the ballot in 1999, and it made it on the ballot and passed in 1999. That gives the medical conditions and the qualifications for people in the state of Colorado to consume cannabis according to what is deemed appropriate between them and their doctor, their care provider. And in the state of Colorado, there were a lot of 99 plant limit counts that were put into place. So people were growing hundreds of plants in their basement. And a lot of people really needed medicine because they came to the state for the freedom, because they couldn't do it in their home states. I opened a medical marijuana dispensary in 2009, ahead of the regulatory curve. In the state of Colorado, I've had every marijuana license, including the marijuana infused product license, the OPC, which is the cultivation license, a retail license, and I started that licensing process in 2010 when licenses became available in Colorado. Also, since 2010, I have faced 3 criminal charges. One for a warehouse full of medical marijuana, which I faced 10 years. I had that charge thrown out because I did actually have all the appropriate paperwork. In 2013, me and some of my friends, we tested the limits of the law. We sent the city of Denver and state of Colorado 4 certified registered letters. We told them that we were basically opening a club for recreational marijuana on Alameda and Pecos. It was called POTUS, P-O-T-U-S. It was People of the United States. The one thing you got to understand about recreational marijuana in the state of Colorado is the bill passed in 2012, November. Our governor, Chickenlooper, he didn't sign that bill right away. In fact, he asked the federal government for their opinion. The federal government gave no opinion. He eventually signed the bill at the end of January and legalized marijuana in the state of Colorado along with the state of Washington. And so what I did today is I brought subsection 1 and subsection 3 of Article 18, Section 16, which is your constitutional right in the state of Colorado to possess and consume recreational marijuana. Now today we're all standing here in a bar, we're drinking lots of alcohol, right? And this is supposed to be regulated in a manner similar to alcohol. Why aren't we consuming it here today?
Because we scared of the po-po.
And I think that has a lot to do with it, and I'll walk you through it a little bit. First off, I want to read subsection 1. It's pretty simple. Colorado Constitutional, Article 18, Section 16, personal use and regulation of marijuana. Purpose and findings. This is why. Purpose and findings. In the interest of the efficient use of law enforcement resources, enhancing revenue for public purposes and the individual freedom, people of the state of Colorado find and declare that the use of marijuana should be legal for persons 21 years of age or older and taxed in a manner similar to alcohol. B, in the interest in the health of public safety of our citizenry, the people of the state of Colorado further find and declare that marijuana should be regulated in a manner similar to alcohol. We're in a bar. There's no weed in here.
I got weed.
So this is the thing. The lawmakers, as soon as they went in, one of the first things they did, they lumped marijuana in with the Clean Indoor Air Act. And a lot of people are familiar with that. You can't smoke cigarettes in here. It's because of the Clean Indoor Air Act. But before we debate that any further, I'd like to read subsection 3. Subsection 3 is personal use of marijuana. Now, I would like to add that if our state representatives decided that we should be free and that they wanted to give us, say, statutes for legal marijuana in the state of Colorado, they could have. And we would have never had to pass a constitutional amendment in the state of Colorado declaring this a right. Okay? In the state of Colorado, you don't have the right to consume alcohol. You don't even have the right to brew alcohol, but you can. And so this was passed, obviously, to be regulated in a manner similar to alcohol. But there's still no weed here, right? Personal use of marijuana. First paragraph. Notwithstanding any other provision of law, the following acts are not unlawful and shall not be an offense under Colorado law or the law of any locality within Colorado or be a basis for seizure or forfeiture of assets under Colorado law for persons 21 years of age or older. Pretty simple. It's all legal. Everything in these paragraphs you can do legally. First paragraph, possessing, using, displaying, purchasing, or transporting marijuana accessories or 1 ounce or less of marijuana. I've got some marijuana accessories over there. They're legal now. And 1 ounce or less of marijuana you can have in your possession anywhere. Right? Yep. Okay. Possessing, growing, processing, or transporting no more than 6 marijuana plants with 3 or few being mature, flowering plants, and possession of the marijuana produced by the plants on the premises where the plants were grown, provided that the growing takes place in an enclosed locked space and is not conducted openly or publicly and is not made available for sale. So basically what that's telling you is you can have your 6 plants. If you grow 6 monster plants, and you get 10 pounds off of each one of those plants, you can have those 60 pounds legally in the space where those plants are grown, provided it is enclosed and locked. So possession, 1 ounce on the streets. In your grow, as much as your plants can produce. If you produced 1 ton last year and you only smoked 2 ounces, then you can have a ton in your barn with your plants. C, transfer 1 ounce or less of marijuana without remuneration to a person who is 21 years of age or older. This one's very important, and I'll get right back to that one. E, which is probably the most important one of this entire paragraph, all of these paragraphs. E, assisting another person who is 21 years of age or older in any of the acts described in paragraphs A through D of this subsection. In other words, we can assist anybody in this room, I'm assuming you're all 21 or up, with any of these acts described. So I'll ask you a question. If you are able to purchase cannabis, and you are able to assist a person with the purchase of cannabis without remuneration, how does that exactly go down? Does anybody here know what remuneration is?
I do now.
Payment.
Payment is remuneration, being paid for a job. So let me walk you through. If Laura calls me, and Laura's like, hey, Cheddar, stop by the dispensary and buy me a bag of weed. And I say, all right, Laura, I'll get you a bag of weed. And I stop by the dispensary and I buy a $50 bag of weed, and I take it to Laura. Do I have to give it to Laura for free according to this law, according to this constitutional amendment?
Yeah.
No, I do not. And let me be clear. If I give her the bag of weed and she gives me $50, she has reimbursed me for the purchase that I assisted her with.
Grab a 12-pack while you're at it.
I'll do that. I can. Absolutely. So just because you purchase a bag of weed from a dispensary for somebody and you give it to them does not mean that you do not get paid for it. You can get reimbursed for it, but you can't legally be remunerated for it. So if Laura calls me and she says, go give me a $50 bag of weed, and I go get a $50 bag of weed and I hand it to her and I say, Laura, give me $60. That's remuneration. Okay? That's being paid remuneration. And so the other thing goes for growing here as well. Possessing, processing, transporting, growing 6 plants. Okay? I can assist you with that. And if we're talking about assistance, well, what does assistance really mean? I mean, if I'm going to help you fix your car, if I'm going to assist you to fix your car, what does that mean? Maybe I stand over you and I tell you how to fix your car with the brakes. Maybe I get under your car and I get greasy and I fix the brakes. Right? Maybe I go to the parts store and get the parts for you. Or maybe I do all of those things and I bring you your car back and I hand you the keys. If I do all of that and not be remunerated from you, I would at least expect for you to pay for the parts. Right? And so that is what assistance is on the books, and that is why it's allowed. Now, Bridgette talked to you a little bit about 1220 and 1221, and I'll just clarify that for you. 1220 was a House bill that passed in the legislative session year before last. And basically what Paban and some of our other legislators did is they said, you know what, this weed thing is out of control. We're still kicking in doors for legal weed, and we've got all of our competitors out there that are growing weed that aren't paying legal taxes on it. So what we're going to do is we're going to limit those plants to 12 plants per household. Okay? You're all libertarians, so I'm sure you're familiar with constitutional rights and statutory law. And the fact is that the lawmakers down at Capitol Hill cannot pass statutory law that is in violation of constitutional rights. These are your constitutional rights. They're right here. It's pretty easy. It's 8th grade reading. It's not even difficult, folks. The fact is that when they passed 1220, they said that you can only have 12 plants in a house. We don't care what your medical condition is. We don't care how sick your kids are. We don't care if your grandma doesn't know how to grow weed and your uncle doesn't know how to grow weed. You get 12 plants. Well, that's a violation of your constitutional rights. It's a violation of A20. As a medical patient, you're allowed to have as many as deemed between you and your medical profession, which this isn't. And A64 says you're allowed to have 6 plants per person. So let me ask you, if we have 3 adults living in a household,
18.
which one doesn't get to exercise their constitutional rights? Should we base it on religion, color? Like what? Like what other... I mean, it's a blatant violation of constitutional rights. And they passed this statutorily, and they knew it was a violation of constitutional rights. Now, what was even worse is they then took $6 million out of the marijuana tax money, the money that I get to pay them as a legal vendor, and they gave that to their law enforcement officers to go kick in doors of their non-tax paying competitors, despite the fact that they have these constitutional rights. And El Paso County is, yes, one of the worst. El Paso County is John Suthers, and John Suthers is the mayor down there, and he is our former AG, and he hates weed. And they will sunset the medical program, and GW Pharma will end up taking CBD, and they will be allowed to have a Schedule 5 listing, while every other person that has a CBD farm will either be consolidated or put out of business. And her timeline, I think it's shorter than, I say 3 to 5, and it's a done deal. So this is the deal. The constitutional rights in the state of Colorado, they're there for a reason. They're there so they can't be plagiarized, but they are being plagiarized. They continue to be plagiarized, and the lawmakers down on Capitol Hill are firmly aware of it. They have collected over $820 million in state-funded taxes. We're in a bar. It's supposed to be regulated like alcohol. The reason we passed A64 was to stop kicking in doors, was to stop putting people in jail, and that hasn't happened. A64 was to be regulated in a manner similar to alcohol. And I can tell you that most of the pushback I get is on Clean Indoor Air Act. But I would also tell you that according to the first paragraph here, notwithstanding any other provision of law, the following acts are not unlawful. And that includes consumption. And that includes consumption in a private spot. So if you look at alcohol regulations in the state of Colorado, is this bar public or is it private?
Public as well.
Is it?
Privately owned.
This bar is a privately owned business open to the public. And in fact, the Colorado liquor laws have been written as such because you can't consume alcohol in public. You can't go out to the bus stop and do shots of Jack.
That's true.
You can't walk down the street with a Budweiser in your house or in your hand. That is public consumption. Okay? But you can walk down 16th Street Mall, which you can't have a beer in your hand, and you can walk into a bar just like this. And you can go step out on the patio and be separated by a 4-foot fence in view of everybody and consume alcohol legally. Okay? In the state of Colorado, those things should be applied exactly the same for alcohol. Now, most people are like, well, wait a minute. Alcohol is liquid, Chris. We're smoking weed and we're doing dabs. Yeah, I get that. But has anybody heard of Dixie Elixirs, Marquand, Keep Cola? Okay? Like, all of those products should have a license on the wall in this bar, and I should be able to have a Dixie's Elixir in here while you guys are having your beer. I had a 6-year-old, she's 8 now. I had a 6-year-old. I went to family court. I had marijuana used against me in family court. And, you know, the one telling thing about the kids and the smart Colorado and the alcohol is it's always about the children. It's about the children, it's about the children, it's about the children. Has anybody been into Chuck E. Cheese recently? Yeah, not only do they have beer, but they have wine, etc. So you can bring a whole gaggle of 6-year-olds to Chuck E. Cheese and string out pitchers of beer on the table, and all of those parents are responsible enough to keep the alcohol away from the children. But somehow, as long hair, hippie, marijuana criminal consumers that we've been touted as coming out of the closet here, we are still experiencing those same issues with cannabis. And so the thing is that the rights are there, and they're pretty straightforward and simple. But our legislators aren't there. And until we hold some legislators accountable, it's going to continue to be that way. And I think whether it's medical or whether it's recreational or whether it's just basic health care, it seems as if our government wants to take the money, because they love the money, $820 million plus so far in the state of Colorado, but they do not want to hand out the liberty. Liberty is what it's all about. That's why I'm here talking to you about subsection 1 and subsection 3. I want to thank you all for letting me be here tonight, and I want to thank Rodney for letting me have a minute to talk to you. Thank you.
Of cannabis. So, Justin.
I have a question in regards to pesticides. Are pesticides in cultivation and pesticides in general in cannabis a problem, or is it only the news headlines making me scared of pesticides?
Well, I would like to speak to that on a couple terms. Just like most agricultural products, pesticides are used. And for most farmers like myself that have been doing it for a long time, that consume our own products, we're very vigilant as far as what goes on the plant. I would also tell you that there is a whole new world of cultivation out there. And the world of cultivation out there is highly regulated. And when, let's say, a purveyor, a businessman, is looking to lose, say, $250,000 crop or $500,000 crop, or spray it down with a pesticide at night and get their money out of it, I would say a lot of that is happening. And I would say that it is important to be vigilant on the pesticides and the testings, but I would also tell you that they're really easy to get around.
I just have one quick follow-up.
Josh,
I just want to know, dispensaries like Legal, L''Eagle, Legal, they market themselves as like being no pesticide or very natural or organic. Is that a real thing? Is that like a real comparative advantage that me as a consumer should care about and go to them rather than other people that are not advertising that? Or are they just saying some shit to get me to go buy my shit from them?
Well, it could work in multiple ways. They could just be saying that to get you to buy it. So it's up to you as the consumer to be very vigilant and ask about their grows, ask about what they're doing, and heck, ask to go see the grow. I've done that many times. I can tell you from a patient perspective, the pesticides are very scary. I have multiple autoimmune diseases. I have Ehlers-Danlos, and I have a lot of things. Woohoo! I know, right? Rare diseases unite. But pesticides are an issue for me. And I cannot shop at most dispensaries because of the way that they grow. If you have an indoor grow, it is virtually impossible to have an organic grow. And because they have overregulated us in most places, you can't grow outside, though some of us do anyway, it becomes very difficult to find a product that can meet your needs. I know without the ability to cultivate, I would be looking at pesticides, unlabeled pesticides. I would be unable to find what I need. The process for making that medicine and that medication would be vile, if you will. Not all dispensaries follow good best practices. So a lot of times they charge you twice for the same medicine, whether it's through concentrates after they dehash the bud or however. So you have to be the diligent consumer. And right now I would say yes, worry about the pesticides.
Well, I add that a lot of times the pesticides that are being used on foods typically break down a lot differently than when they have been applied with heat and they're being consumed through a smokable format. So you do have some pesticides that have already shown to turn into lethal gases when actually consumed by flame. So that's an issue as well.
Matt, I saw your hand, bro.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if we're here talking about liberty, why are we talking about man's law?
Excuse me?
Max, by the way.
Max.
But we're here talking about liberty, but why are we talking about man's law? It's not liberty.
One of the reasons that we have to address the things in such a manner is because perception is reality in many ways. And the only way that we can work within the framework, because believe it or not, there are things that even as free as we would like to be, we are constrained by man's law.
Why bend the definition of freedom?
I don't believe the definition of freedom is being bent as much as it is being pursued in and by people who are not free. So if you are looking at the best possible circumstances so that your children can be freer than you, this is where we're at. And it would be hard for us to really attest to how positive of a thing legalization is if we cannot attest to how bad criminalization of cannabis is.
And do you think freedom is materialistic, or do you think freedom is a mindset?
Okay, I'm going to say both, because I get the freedom to do things materially, and I also have the freedom to think about the things that I would like to do materially.
I've sold weed for
Hold on,
13
Max.
years.
Hold on, Max. Hold on, bro.
So-
You're doing good. We still did. I won't need to.
It wasn't free then. It
But,
was
well,
legally.
Right. And so, what is your point? What are you trying to get to?
I was free to do what I did because I chose to do it, not because man said I could.
So we have to deal with this issue specifically because people who are exercising their freedom are actually getting their doors kicked in. Over one plant, we had a patient out in Teller County, epileptic son, one plant had his door kicked in, literally things stolen. Which it is, absolutely. So we are addressing it because we are fighting that tyranny, because we don't want our kids to have to fight that tyranny. Everybody should be free.
Being thrown in jail is free.
Well, you do both, because you have to do both. You can't just exercise your freedom and then not make it free for everyone else. You have to be sure that those fail-safes are in place and make it more free for the next generation. So you do challenge it. Like I said, we do grow outside, we do grow our account, we do our stuff, but we also don't want to be thrown in jail.
I don't think the forefathers gave a shit about jail or death when they wanted to be free, which is what this whole state of this country was formed on.
Well,
So the mindset that you just proclaimed isn't actually true to what this country was formed on.
but Max,
So,
you are in right here, right now, taking benefit of the framework this country is based upon, and even with your expression of freedom, you are still constrained by the rules and regulations and the statutory limits put upon you by others, far be it from you, even if you haven't signed on to it. We know that. We know those are the cases. And we know that they have arbitrary enforcement vehicles, such as police, to make sure that we stay within that constrained or that confined area. In order for us to let you express this freedom that you want, we have to break through the box. We fight inside the box like Stacy Lynn did, and made it capable, made her child able to have her medicine, his medicine, at his school. Now, you may say that's following the rules, that's following the laws, that's playing within the general framework of the authoritarians who have fostered this false identity on what we consider a harmless plant. But others of us sit up there and look at so many people who have had their freedoms robbed from them, their homes taken from them, their children removed from them because of the same system. And when we find someone who is able to work on the inside and kick ass and be able to break a hole in that barrier, moving towards freedom, not moving away from it, then we celebrate it. And we try to celebrate it in the best ways that we can. I would love to sit right here and follow up with Jetter and be able to sit here, and we would be more comfortable smoking weed. All three of us would be much more comfortable smoking weed doing this.
Thought you were free.
Okay, let's move on. Next question.
I have a question.
Voting harder.
I have a question. I am not a smoker, not against it. I have plenty of friends and relatives who smoke. I actually experienced a second-hand smoke, which got me high, including my grandson. What is we were on 38th Street, where plenty of bars and whatever. What do you have in a way of where, not about me, but about my 4-year-old grandson?
What about the children?
Yeah, obviously 21 and older can, but how would you avoid being in the situation where he walks on the street and all of a sudden he's dancing like dancing on the star?
Well, I would attribute. I would look at that on several different levels, and I'm a father, and I have a kid at home, and I guess it goes like this. Like most parenting tools, you need to be a responsible parent, right? And I don't think that's lost on anybody in this room. I think secondhand smoke you shouldn't have around children. I mean, in the society that we live in, and the danger, the perceived danger, you should probably not have your children in secondhand smoke. But I will also say, with that being said, there's not any secondhand smoke that is going to harm your child. None of it is going to be fatal. And even, say, some of the learning studies that have been done are questionable as to whether there is an efficacy against your kid's learning ability. So I would say, first off, that's your parenting. Like, a parent shouldn't have their kid around somewhere where there's secondhand smoke, right? And if your kid does experience secondhand smoke and gets a little high and a little giggly, well, I would also tell you that, there's people that let their kids sip off their beers at home too. And nobody's batting an eye at that. So I think it really comes back to perception, as in regulated like alcohol. I'll speak on my personal experience. When I was in divorce court with my ex, there was a photograph that was entered into evidence against me. That photograph was a photograph of me and my child on Easter, and she was sitting across the table from me, coloring Easter eggs. In fact, she was holding them up in the photo, and in the photo was just a corner shot of my bong that was sitting on the table that actually had a bowl in it that was green, hadn't been smoked out of. And that was entered into evidence, and I was asked to explain why I had drugs in front of my child. And my response was that yes, I did in fact have cannabis sitting on the table within my child's reach. It was in fact in the bowl of the cannabis, which hadn't been consumed on. And yes, I did consume that cannabis. In fact, I walked 3 foot out onto my back patio I pulled a lighter out of my pocket, I sucked that bong hit, and I looked my 6-year-old right in the eyeball as I sucked it down and blew it out in the air. And I came back inside and I continued to color Easter eggs with my child. Of course, that wasn't taken very lightly with the judge. But I can tell you that in my defense, if that had been a bottle of Jack Daniels, or if that had been a bottle of wine, or an open glass of any alcohol consumable, I wouldn't even be judged for it. But that's not the reality of the situation in Colorado and in family court. So again, I think if you're able to take a gaggle of 6-year-olds to Chuck E. Cheese and get hammered on beer, like I think Dixie's Liquors and Markball are fair game.
Thank you.
Great.
I've seen Native Roots gas stations in Colorado Springs. Why do they have gas stations down there but you can't do that here? Haven't you seen those?
Okay,
There's gas stations down there.
yeah, they're called gas and grass. Yeah. Yeah. So what they did is Colorado Springs doesn't allow recreational sales. And the gas and grass works like this. You can go pump your gas for a certain price and they will give you for free some cannabis. So it was a clever scheme by Native Roots to kind of bring a recreational feel to Colorado Springs. You don't have that issue up here.
Several times during your talk, you mentioned holding politicians accountable.
Yes.
Is anybody doing that, or do you have mechanisms in place to make that possible?
Yes, we're actually gearing up for legislative season right now. So, yep, starts in January, and we've been kind of hibernating, but I've been through the last couple legislative seasons, and we are holding our elected officials accountable. Though I am one person, and we need everybody to hold their elected officials accountable. During the elections in this past year, I was able to call and talk to both candidates running to get their positions on these things. And we've actually, in Colorado Springs, turned city council, we flipped them from evangelical to, I guess, progressive is what they're going to be considered now. But we have been able to move legislators and elected officials around based on cannabis. It really just depends on how involved you get, but unless you get involved, it can't happen.
If I might ask a follow-up, do you have a list of voters who will change their vote for a candidate based off of that candidate's position on weed?
A list of voters, no.
Well, I can tell you that last legislative session, when they passed 1220 and 1221, those were the two bill pieces that we were talking that limited the plant count and then funded the law enforcement officers. I can tell you, I was at that legislative reading. That legislative reading for 1220 started at about 10 a.m. in the morning. It was a complete packed house. In fact, I've never seen a bill with that many people participating and speaking on it with their 2 minutes. I can tell you that particular night, the testimony from the pro side, from the people that were opposing the legislation, stayed until that vote was read at about 11 p.m. at night. I can also tell you that at 11:30 that night they read 1221, and at 11:30 at night when they did read 1221, all of their opposition that had been there for almost 12 hours that day had gone home. I can also tell you that they brought in 25 fresh law enforcement officers to testify on behalf of why they needed that $6 million to kick in doors. And I can also tell you that the business owners, people like myself that have licenses, although I believe in liberty and freedom, I can tell you that a lot of my peers do not. And I can tell you that they pump a lot of lobby money into the legislative and the representatives to ensure that home grows are continued to be criminalized and eradicated.
And I'll get to you in just a second, Kelly. All right. In regards to that, yes, there are people who are holding politicians to the fire. Amy Don Hildebrandt has the VIP and consistently asks politicians and business leaders to come and discuss their position on cannabis. Now, the problem is that many of the politicians are very slick, and so instead of showing up personally, they'll send someone that is in their office, and they'll end up getting high for them. You know, and so it's surrogate high. But at the same time, before that started happening, they were brushing off the cannabis industry totally. They were taking the money and wouldn't show up at any of the programs. Now they're showing up because there's a lot that is going on. I'm very concerned about this upcoming legislative session because of the occupants. If they couldn't keep their hands off of junk mail, I do not think they're going to be able to keep their hands off of a perceived vice and the amount of money that vice brings into the coffers, plus them having Tabor to fight against. And so all of these things as a confluence of bad decision making with authoritarianism, plus a lot of new people in the area that are changing the demographics of those who really, like Chris, like Bridgette, myself. Let me say, I did not vote for 64 because I thought it was going to put my stripper friends out of business. And, you know, and, well, you know, the poll ain't going the way to go. It's, but, what I didn't realize is that my stripper friends were making a lot of money, so they opened up a dispensary. Okay. However, what we're finding out because of the discussion that we're having is that the legislators are making it harder and harder and harder to pursue free market enterprise in the cannabis industry. I am looking at you and saying, if you know someone who has the power to make a decision, get them high. Yep. Just get them high. Let them use some CBD tincture on their knees. You know their knees are bad. You know? For whatever reason.
Well, I think another thing that I've experienced within the legislative space is, you know, we've had a lot of legislators that were adamantly against cannabis and cannabis products and had been for a long time until they had somebody in their family get sick. Until until cancer has touched them, or Crohn's, or some other, you know, a lot of the children that have the epileptic seizures. I mean, I don't think it goes without saying that anybody in this room would want to help their own child if they knew that a medicine existed that your government didn't want you to get your hands on. I don't think there's anybody that wouldn't try it to help their own kids. And that goes same with legislators.
Yeah.
Two more?
Yes, Caleb.
Yeah, so I know you guys have been talking about, like, you know, smoking with our legislators and stuff
Yes.
like that. Bridgette, what would you say is, like, for all of us who aren't necessarily involved in the medicinal community, like, what would you recommend, like, where are some good starting points for us to, like, really get in on this? Because I firmly believe, like you guys have been talking about, if we're not, like, proactive about instituting these measures and things like that, then by the time we're like, oh, we need to do this, it's already beyond the point where we actually can. So, like, what would you recommend personally, like, with your expertise, as far as where should we start?
Well, specifically with the medical program, this means that you need to have a rapport with your legislators. But the main things with the medical program that we want to make sure is that patients have full access to the cultivation and the processing and the storage of whatever medicine that they use. In order to keep my autoimmune disease. I have rheumatoid arthritis as a primary. So to keep that into remission, I take tetrahydrocannabinolic acid, which is THCA.
Yeah.
It's non-psychoactive, but it requires that I have fresh plant. I also can't have the same strains all the time, otherwise my body develops a tolerance.
Right.
So I have a 14 strain rotation, which means that my plant count should be well above 99 if I'm able to keep that. In a dispensary, which is where they're trying to push you to, this would cost thousands and thousands of dollars, and
Right.
most patients don't have money.
And the whole point, I mean, it's a more cost-effective all-natural.
It's more cost effective, it's safer. As an autoimmune patient, I have been on chemotherapy, I have been on steroids, I have been through the gamut of things, and I have failed all the pharmaceutical there is.
Right.
THCA is the only reason my organs are not shutting down.
Yeah.
And so this, until you get in the trenches and you see just how many people are affected by this and just how many people actually do die without even knowing that this would help, it doesn't become urgent. So make sure that you get with your elected officials, but also watch the patient groups. I'm gonna make a suggestion that we don't watch the lobbyists. We have a couple lobbyists that have been a little sketchy as far as their allegiances go. Yes, that's their job. So watch what the patient groups are doing. Canada Patient Resource Connection is mine. He mentioned Amy Hilterbrand's group, American Medical Refugees. We work very closely with them. Cannability, which is Stacy Lynn's group, is also the other main patient group there is. So definitely connect with those specific patient groups and kind of watch for that, because we will put all calls out and say, this is happening.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of the lobbies, I mean, I think the thing is when you talk about industry groups helping or hurting the industry and patients' rights, I would tell you that most of the larger groups, National Cannabis Industry Association, Marijuana Industry Group, a lot of those groups are focused on one thing, and that's the dollar bill. They're not focused on patients' rights. They're not focused on advocating for recreational cannabis or any of those items. There's only one common denomination for those people, and it's the capitalism and it's the money involved. So a lot of times, I worked on these initiatives thinking that, to speak to the guy in the back, Max, that we would actually have some freedom. That these levers of government being switched were finally going to give us the liberty to do what we wanted to do within the space. What I'm finding as a licensed business owner is the restrictions and regulations that the state has imposed has basically stripped us of those liberties, and in the process it has picked up a capitalistic, carpet-bagging entrepreneurs that are here solely for the dollar, and they are molesting the industry.
Right. How many of you guys use cannabis?
Woo! Yes, baby. We're all gonna smoke up the
Right on. For those of you that haven't used cannabis, how many do you know people that use cannabis besides what's in this room? Okay, and so what I'm saying is, it's a lot of what we're talking about seems like a fringe thing. It's not fringe. Your friends are using it. If you're not using it, your friends are using it.
And even in, obviously in non-legalized states, one of my biggest clientele in my business are out-of-staters who are coming here to have a legalized consumption, so that they are not running the risk of getting in trouble. Like, this is like their vacation to come here. I had people from Chicago, I had people from North Carolina, Arizona. All these states, especially like in the southeast, that are having like the troubles with legalization. People are coming here to consume in a legal space.
And I would like to speak to that. That is the part of the taxed, not legal, that I like to talk about. It's a hashtag you can look up. You'll find plenty of instances. But I would tell you that is entrapment. You've got a state that has legalized a product is collecting upwards of 35% in tax. By the way, alcohol is taxed at about a 5% rate.
Right.
And they are spending exorbitant amounts in the state. They're collecting that tax dollar, and then they are not allowing those people anywhere to consume the product. You can't consume it in your car.
Right.
You can't consume it at the park like you can beer or wine.
Right.
You can't consume it in your hotel because your hotel is going to fine you. And so if you are caught out on the street with cannabis, you're going to get a public consumption ticket.
And then you have to come back to Colorado.
That's right, and then you will have to come back to Colorado, and you will have to go to court. And I would also say that there's a couple things. First off, I would imagine if you look at criminal citations in the state of Colorado, 2012 compared to 2017, for instance, I would bet that you have a rise in marijuana-related criminal citations that have been placed in the state of Colorado. I can also tell you that a lot of our carpetbagging friends that like to pat each other on the back are at an award ceremony tonight.
Yes, they are.
For cannabis.
Congratulations for being here.
And that's fine, but I can tell you that 2 executives from the Sweet Leaf chain were put into jail this week. And you may know about the looping scandal where they were selling ounces at a time to individuals that were coming in and buying multiple ounces a day. That was legal according to the statutory law, the way it was written, when it was written. They have changed that statutory law. It is now a 1 ounce a day limit statutorily, even though constitutionally I'm allowed to have my ounce whenever. And if I consume that ounce today or tonight, say with all of you people, I need to go back to the dispensary right now and get another ounce. And that's within my right. The absurdity that's surrounding that case is there are people, again, going to jail for cannabis, which is the reason we passed A64. The additional absurdity of that is that the state of Colorado sponsors, state-sponsored looping. And the example that I'll give you is Trinidad, Colorado. I don't know if anybody here in this room has been down to Trinidad, Colorado. But Trinidad, Colorado generates more cannabis tax revenue than the city of Aurora. Trinidad, Colorado has a population total of 8,100 people. There is currently a dispensary for every 360 residents in the city of Trinidad. Trinidad, with that 8,100 person population, generates more tax revenue than Aurora, Colorado, which has a population of 367,000 and is the closest city to an international airport within the metro area. So to throw Sweet Leaf executives in jail for looping, which the state is clearly doing down on the southern border, seems pretty absurd, counterproductive.
Okay, Ann.
Last guy.
What is looping?
Lick and Looper?
What is looping?
Looping is a term that they coined during this investigation. Basically what happened is a neighbor had called about a dispensary that was in their neighborhood, a Sweet Leaf dispensary, and they had claimed that this dispensary was selling a lot of weed. And so the investigators set up an investigation. And what they found is that people were coming in out of state, and they were going to Sweet Leaf stores, and they were walking into the store, and they were buying an ounce. They were going out to their car, they were putting it in their trunk, they were walking back into the front door, they were buying another ounce, they were taking it outside, putting it in their trunk, and doing it again. And so that term became known as looping. Again, at the time, the statutory law was 1 ounce per transaction, which is exactly what those bud tenders followed within the letter of the law. Possession, which is defined in the constitutional amendment at 1 ounce, is on you. You are responsible for possession. I could have an ounce in my pocket right now, and I could walk into a dispensary and buy another ounce, and nobody's going to question whether I have an ounce in my pocket. Not only that, but there's a little over 750 dispensaries in the metro area. So I can drive from store to store to store and collect over 750 ounces of weed and drive it back to whichever state I feel like.
Give it up for our panel.
All right, so before we go, thank you very much. Before we go, and I know